I just wanted to introduce everyone that you see on the screen here. Adamir in the white and Paul in the black. They're both from Kelowna, BC, PES volunteers, and it's the three of us that have been trying to take over the reins from Hasala and Conrad to keep this podcast going. And it's really nice working with you guys, and none of this is possible without the teamwork that we accomplish. So appreciate that. And Hasala, the pulling the strings behind the scenes, always lining up amazing guests and encouraging us and supporting us. And Hasala is the U.S. and Canada Student Branch Chapter Committee Chair. And Conrad will be probably tuning in here soon enough. And without further ado, our guest today is Mr. John McWilliams. Welcome, John. John is the current Senior Innovation Engineer at Dairyland Power Cooperative in Wisconsin, USA. And he's been a member of the IEEE for 29 years. A little bio about John here is that he received his Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Iowa State University in 1978, then worked for 10 years for Westinghouse Electric Corporation as a field service engineer. And he was a site manager there for up to 40 engineers working on construction projects in Saudi Arabia, and projects that included Aramco, natural gas, Petromin-Mobil Export Refinery near Yanbu, Saudi Arabia, and the Petromin-Shell Export Refinery near Jubail, Saudi Arabia, amongst other projects. And then in 1988, John transitioned to the role of Regional Technical Manager for AVO International, also known as Megger. I don't know what the relationship is between those two companies, and he oversaw the technical sales for manufacturers of electrical test equipment and managed sales offices from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the South Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand, and worked from Dover, England, and manufacturing facilities covering Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And then 22 years ago, he joined the Dairyland Power Cooperative, where he still works today as the Senior Innovation Engineer, and now oversees planning, contract negotiations, development of generation projects, including renewable energy projects, and regulatory issues for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and conventional generation. So there's so much to talk about there, John. We'll start off with how are you doing today? How is your day?
Like I say, it's been a very good day for me. By that, I had basically my first outing since COVID started back in March of last year. I got to go to a meeting up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, on electric vehicles. Primary interest was that they wanted to see the electric vehicle I was driving, but it counts as an outing.
Yeah. Nice. What electric vehicle are you driving?
It's a 2019 Nissan Leaf, all electric. It's the only all electric vehicle in our fleet. We've got quite a few plug-in hybrids, but it's the only all electric. We got the Nissan Leaf because it was the only one available at the time that allowed us to put energy back into the system from the car.
Right.
In other words, we could charge the car, and then we could use it to take energy out of the vehicle for like peak periods or whatever. But unfortunately, the pandemic has delayed our receiving the equipment necessary for the transfer of energy back from the car to the grid. So hopefully we'll get that later this year and really start those trials.
I just saw in the news today that with like the price reduction and the credit, that the Nissan Leaf, the 2021 Nissan Leaf, is now the cheapest all-electric vehicle in the United States. At least that's what the headline I saw. So it's the competition is really healthy for the end customer right now, it seems.
Yeah, there were a number of vehicles up there on display today, from the usual Teslas to Toyota RAV4 to Chevy Bolts to a few other. So yeah, they're getting more common out there, but yeah, we're still in the early stages, and like General Motors has announced that they're going to full electric by like 2035 or something like that, and all the new models that are supposed to come out by 2025. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What we're trying, what the meeting I was on about today is, what's that going to do to the likes of the electric co-ops in the area? What are we going to have to do for infrastructure? How's it going to impact us? How fast will these vehicles get out into rural areas? Because we see higher rates of adoption out on the coasts and then the larger cities, but in rural areas,
So
it's still.
is this a bit of a promotion and advocacy partnership between like utilities and cooperatives like Dairyland Power and electric car companies? Like, do you get
We're
to?
opening those.
Yeah.
We're opening those conversations because, quite simply, we're going to need each other.
Yeah.
The co-ops, particularly in Wisconsin, are investing a considerable amount of money into charging infrastructure. And the question is, are the vehicles going to be out there that we're going to use this infrastructure, or are we just basically putting money into the ground?
Right.
So yeah, it's a horse and cart thing, which yeah, or
Absolutely.
maybe a proverbial chicken and egg, which comes first, the electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, or does the charging infrastructure come first and encourages people to get the cars? That's what we spend hours trying to determine, because think of it in these terms. If we can encourage people to charge their vehicles between, say, midnight and 8 a.m., it might be able to be done with the existing generating fleet. But if people want to charge their vehicles between, say, 2 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the evening, then it's going to require a considerable amount of infrastructure build out, from new generating stations to substation upgrades to distribution line upgrades.
Yeah. How many like much more significant, how many orders of magnitude more is it compared to maybe the highest draw item someone used to have in their house? Like what does an electric vehicle look like in comparison to even a high draw household?
To give you an idea on the American side anyway, if it's charged off of what's called a level 1 charger, which is 120 volt, it would be like adding an electric hair dryer to your system or to your house load for a period of about 40 to 50 hours.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. If you go off of a level 2 charger, which is 240 volt, it'd be like adding 4 window air conditioners to your electric bill for a period of about 10 to 12 hours.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it can be significant.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like I say, if it's a household where in the afternoon you're looking at running your dishwasher or your clothes dryer and your air conditioning and a few others, then you suddenly add this big load. Yeah, it could have a significant impact on our system.
And that's just considering one vehicle households. We still have a lot of people will have
Might
two
have
electric vehicles. Yeah.
might have 2 vehicles, and then you have to think, okay, take a distribution line that might have 20, 30 loads on it, and add that a car to each of those loads, or even to half of them. It makes a significant impact. So what
Absolutely.
we've been trying to understand is, how's that load coming at us, what shape it's going to be, what time of the day. Will things like time of use rates make a difference?
Mm-hmm.
We incentivize you to charge your car between midnight and 8 in the morning by giving you a very low rate for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Or people go, yeah, I only charge this thing once a week, and I'm
Yeah.
just going to do it when I get home.
Well, to be making these high level decisions and inquiries like you are now, you presumably had to start at much less responsibility jobs somewhere. And for a lot of people tuning in, really interested in how careers start. And so, what was your experience like getting your first job out of university in the field?
Well, can I just roughly put it that my career really got off to an horrendous start. And you laugh, but you think in terms of you're being impacted by COVID-19, and you're wondering how that's going to impact your career.
Yeah.
Uh, think in these terms. When I was starting, I graduated in 1978, and in those years leading up to about that, the electric system was growing at about 7 to 10% per year. That meant it was doubling in size roughly every 10 years. Okay. So, and it takes about 10 years to get, it took about 10 years to get a major power plant built. So you're basically planning one, getting one built. Then next time you'd have to plan two and get those built next time.
Wow.
The, the construction rate and all that was very, very high. Well, right about 1980, in the 70s, a couple of things happened. One was the second oil embargo, which impacted the United States. And then that really hit home for a lot of people and encouraged energy efficiency.
Right.
And so growth in the utility industry went from 7 to 10% per year down to basically zero.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you an idea, when I graduated in Iowa, there were 7 investor-owned utilities in Iowa. None of those exist as standalone companies these days.
Wow.
There's 2 investor-owned utilities, and they over multiple states.
And so that reduction in growth was purely from unlocking all these efficiencies that hadn't even been bothered with before?
Yes.
Wow.
And so, if you think back, that's about the time electronics really started to take over in televisions, and people started insulating houses better. It just really set in energy efficiency. The other thing that occurred about 1980, I don't remember the exact year, was of all things, Russia invaded Afghanistan, which may not mean much, but what occurred was the United States responded by putting a grain embargo on Russia. So almost overnight, grain prices collapsed. And when you're in a state that's heavily dependent on grains, the economic environment in Iowa just literally collapsed almost overnight.
Wow.
And then they put in interest rates. You think in terms of interest rates now. Interest rates when I was your age were up around 20-some% on a car loan or a house loan. So economically, it was like, okay, am I going to be employed here for a while because there are more people leaving the state of Iowa, and then we're ever moving back. The state lost population that decade.
Right.
So that was literally what led me to Saudi Arabia, because Westinghouse basically came to me and said, John, you're young, you got 2 choices. You're unemployed or you go to Saudi Arabia.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah. So I thought, well, I've not been outside the United States before. So I took the one-way ticket and passport and a couple $100 and went to Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Ended up there for 4 years.
If you could bring yourself back to what was your even perspective of what Saudi Arabia could be in the 1980s with less access to the internet and more word of mouth knowledge, and everything you knew was from libraries and yeah.
Okay, Clinton, first off, in 1980, I'm not sure the internet existed outside of the military or
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly that common. To give you an idea, it was interesting in that from coming from a rural agrarian state like Iowa, going to Saudi Arabia, it was like going to polar opposites, in that you get to Saudi Arabia and little to no natural vegetation because it was hot and very dry. Yeah, things that you were accustomed to, like movie theaters, restaurants, whatever. There were no movies theaters as such. Restaurants were fairly common, but it was just a completely different um, lifestyle. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you're asked to do, and then you're asked to manage big projects and do business with local companies and run a big projects out there. So that's all like thrown into the deep end.
Well, oddly, that got thrown in the deep end, but oddly, it came about from a really strange reason in that I was what was considered a corporate engineer. I actually was an engineer, a Westinghouse employee, whereas a lot of them were either contract employees or had only been hired after I'd been hired. So I actually had seniority and was corporate, and most of the employees were well over twice my age. A lot of them were in their late 50s and 60s. So here I'm in Saudi Arabia trying to manage people that were older than my father. So it's like, yeah, it was an interesting period in my life.
Yeah.
Having managed people from such an early part in your career and manage them to this day, for the young professionals and students watching, what is something that you really value in someone who's new to the field and a new employee that you know that's going to set them apart and help them sustain a good trajectory on their career?
Well, I've worked with engineers from, in one way or another, from I don't know how many countries. The likes of the Petromin-Shell project in Jubail, Saudi Arabia, even though it was a much smaller team than I was managing, overall in the project, there were something like 40 different countries that were represented
Wow.
in that project. So you were working with engineers from Spain, from Brazil, from South Africa, from Japan, from Ireland, all over. And really, to answer your question, from the well, for the most part in those days, I was the youngster. From the younger engineering perspective, it was, you could tell those that were dedicated to their profession, those who were really interested. And the idea from the older people is you'll take them under the wing type stuff, and you work and you help transfer knowledge. I'll use an analogy that goes back to my days on the farm. Is that I had older brothers and I had younger brothers, and the way to get to a better job was to train the younger brother to do the job you didn't like.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So not that we're training the younger engineers to do jobs we don't like, but the idea is we're all moving forward in this. And so by helping younger engineers learn things that I was doing meant that we could all move on, or I could move on to the next projects or next things and help them move on also. So the idea is to help develop young engineers.
Yeah, yeah.
I worked with too many old engineers that it was like, oh, I can't share any knowledge with you because if I do that, it'll make me less valuable.
Yeah.
Like, no, it makes you more valuable because then you can move on to the next level, and we can help. So no, I always look for opportunities and ways to help engineers start into the profession.
It's all about sharing knowledge. And also, John, looking back, is there something that stands out that you wish you had known at the start of your career? Like something that stands out?
Another an analogy that you learn that experience is something you get after you need it. And the idea is that, yeah, I wish I had given more thought about joining Westinghouse because it was, yeah, it was on the downhill. And it was a major corporation. When you graduated and you're like, I'm going to work for Westinghouse. And it was like, you know, you've made it, big corporation, all that, bright future. And then a year or two into it, it's like, why does the company keep selling off divisions? Why do we keep hearing of financial difficulties? Why, you know, things aren't going, don't never seem to be going well. And so
Yeah.
I wish I had spent more time, but it was, again, part of the sign of the times too, because energy efficiency, reduction in energy, yeah, their sales were decreasing because of what was going on in the electric industry.
Mhm.
But actually, what was going on in the electric industry didn't impact them as much as their um, real estate dealings in Florida and their fixed price uranium deals in Canada.
Right.
So,
If
so
if
yeah,
if anyone watching right now, in the future, or right now ends up in a similar situation, like, what's a piece of advice if you end up with a company that you really think is not heading in a good direction? How do you make the best of that situation? Like, you don't want to burn bridges, you don't want to build a bad reputation, but you also, you need to pay your bills too. You got to stick around for.
that was always part of it. It was like, okay, I'm going to keep paying the bills, but like I was explaining to the group I was talking to last week, is that if you look at the top 10 companies that were existed in the United States in 1980, they were all manufacturers, and for the most part, were in the energy industry.
Mm-hmm.
You come forward to 2020, and only one of those companies is still in the top 10. That was ExxonMobil. It went from number 1 to number 10. And companies like Amazon, Alphabet, Walmart, um, 2 or 3 health companies are now in the top 10. And you realize they're not manufacturers. They're service oriented in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the world has changed significantly. And from your perspective, it might mean that the companies you're working for now may not exist in 40 years, or there may be entirely different new companies that have replaced them. So what you're ending up doing is keeping yourself up to date with your skills, knowledgeable. Excuse me, just a second.
Yeah, no problem.
And one of the things that you guys will have the advantages. There are things like the online learning ability. Yeah, for example, you could get master's degrees in engineering, business, law, whatever online. So you're not having to quit your jobs for a couple of years to go back to school to get the next degree to move on. You can take night classes, you can work, and you could be in Canada or wherever you are and take a class at Penn State in Pennsylvania, at
Yeah.
Iowa State in Ames. You can get your qualifications at very good universities without without excuse me, without having to leave your current position. So yeah, you can keep your skills up to date, develop new skills. And with the internet, you can look at what jobs are becoming available out there, what they're requiring. And so, yeah, if things aren't looking good at a company that you're at, you can work towards that next position.
Yeah, and then you actually practiced what you preached there, because in 2011 you graduated. You were the first person to graduate with from the Iowa State University with a certificate of biorenewable resources.
Yeah.
That what motivated you to do that at that time?
Well, I was a couple of things. One is I was working on my master's in systems engineering, and that was primarily in the renewable energy field. And the graduate certificate in biorenewable resources and technology was sort of a tag along that I could do that at the same time. almost. And so when I graduated, got my systems engineering master's in 2010, all I had to do was another year to get the graduate certificate. I didn't know at the time that I was going to be the first graduate. Didn't even know I was that until almost a year later when they called me up and said, "Oh, did you know you were the first graduate? We want to talk to you about that." I'm like, okay. But at the time, uh, renewables were just getting a start. Well, renewables have been around. Renewables were the first way of generating energy anyway, from water wheels to wind turbines in Netherlands and whatever. So renewables were the first real source of energy. But as far as generating electricity, hydroelectric was fairly large, but and wind was starting to take off in the 2000s. But in the 2010 range, we were looking at renewable resources such as wood pulp, uh, animal wastes, and the like as possible sources of renewable energy generation. And so that helped me understand what those were and to evaluate them and to see whether or not any of those systems would actually work for us.
Right. And those sources, for it to be viable or for it to be efficient, they tend to be things that are often considered waste. And that's
Yeah.
kind of one of the, because for some reason what came to mind was ethanol and corn and the massive farms you have in Iowa, but that wouldn't really makes as much sense if you're growing it just for fuel. It kind of, when you say food, animal waste and wood waste, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, one of the systems that still exists on our system is a wastewater treatment plant at Bush Beans in Augusta, Wisconsin. That's one that they put in. But Bush Beans is about 80% or so of the canned bean market in the United States. So they got food waste from food manufacturers that are looking at doing digesters, large animal confinement operations, dairy farms that have waste treatment issues are looking at these as a way to help them mitigate their problems.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a startup in Vancouver. Well, not a startup. I guess it's 10 years old now, but that has been doing some boiler combustion reactor combination projects that actually powers the University of British Columbia, one of the wings, and it uses it can burn anything from like solidified sewage sludge to wood waste and possibly compost, like treated compost and stuff like that. So it's definitely really could be a big unlock in the future.
Yeah, Wisconsin has, we're known as the dairy state, so we do have a lot of animal waste, and also we have a lot of wood processing facilities, Nakusa Papers, Weyerhaeuser, and a lot. So we got a lot of timber operations that have a lot of waste wood that can be used for biomass. So yeah, unfortunately, with the likes of the financial issues of the late 2007, 2008, and then the pandemic, energy prices have been historically low for the last 5-6 years, and that's impacted the operation of these plants. It's made them, for the most part, economically unviable.
Yeah, I often wonder about the feedback loops that might soon accelerate with people starting to decentralize power and generate on their roof or however they want to. And it's been, I've seen it in the literature written about like the socioeconomic impact of the people who can afford it are probably going to be the first adopters, and it kind of leaves the lowest income people behind to pick up the bill, where the utilities are like, hey, we got to raise prices because we have less customers. And although we might come to that day soon where the prices aren't balanced and the supply and demand gets thrown out of whack. And do you see any of that happening as more and more people slowly start to decentralize?
That has been a ongoing issue for utilities for the better part of the last decade. When you plug your computer into the wall that electricity you're using has multiple components to it. Not just, you see it just strictly as the energy, but from the utility perspective, it's got the lines, the poles, the trucks, the
Right.
people, the buildings, all of that has to be paid for through that energy usage that you have. And so when you offset it by something else, the energy component of that unit of energy that you use is about 25% of the actual cost. And so the other 3/4 then gets, if you're using a rooftop solar to offset that full price, that 3/4 of that price that was going towards the poles, the wires, the trucks, and everything, has to be then shared by the remaining people in the system. So yeah, it's a debate.
Yeah. What do you see? What is the discourse at the level that you're at in senior positions? Like, what kind of decisions have to be made?
At the moment, no real hard decisions have been made because the impact has been relatively small and fairly uniform across our system. So we're not seeing it as a major concern at the moment. But states like California, where they're encouraging more rooftop solar, yes, I can see that being more of an issue for them.
Right.
Ours at the moment are more of a, people just want to put in solar. So
Yeah, I mean, PG&E seems desperate to reduce loads at any costs, and as the co-op that you manage and the sustainable aspects that you're bringing in. Actually, Adamir had a good question about your shifting your career focus that he had wanted to ask as well. Hey.
Oh yeah, so looking at your career history, just like Clinton was saying, what made you shift your career focus to working with more sustainable sources of electricity with your studies in biorenewable resources?
what really focused it was that two of the main states that Dairyland does business in, Minnesota and Wisconsin, both had renewable portfolio standards.
Okay.
Minnesota, we had, excuse me again, I've been talking all day is the problem. I'm not used to it. Minnesota had a 25% by 2025 requirement, meaning 25% of our energy had to be sourced from renewable resources. And in Wisconsin, it was 10% statewide by 2015. We're on course to meet all those requirements. That's not the issue. But what you're looking at is in a utility where load growth is about 0.5% per year, being asked to add 25% of a different type of generation much faster than what our load was growing.
Mhm.
It's like we had a wind farm here. What does that do to our conventional generation over here? Because it's going to offset what that generation is, because we're adding generation faster than what we need it for load growth because of these mandates. But yeah, the shift was primarily because we needed to meet the renewable requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I
Is
see.
there a bit of a I've seen some more interesting research as these solar and wind projects mainly have actually had some time to age, and there's been more longitudinal data coming out from those projects. I wondered, as you were saying that, whether the cost for maintenance, just like with electric cars, some of the buzz is that electric vehicles take hardly any maintenance, which may be true in electric vehicles, but solar panels, a lot of them that were installed in the last 10 or 20 years were of the kind of they weren't as developed as they are today, and they had shorter lifespans. Whereas today, a solar panel actually has an optimistic lifespan of 10, 15, 20 years, whereas the ones that said they were going to be 10, 15 years when they were installed 10, 15 years ago, they're already at like half capacity after 7 years. So I wonder, is part of the calculation with maintaining existing or fossil fuel generating plants and then installing new wind or solar, like what is the maintenance consideration, and has there been any promising data from either one?
Well, let me add one clarifying fact here is that because of the tax rules, Dairyland itself doesn't own or operate any renewables because we can't take advantage. We're a nonprofit organization, so we can't take advantage of the tax, the investment tax or the production tax. So our renewable facilities are operated and maintained by third parties.
Right.
So, but what we're seeing is, let's start with the wind. What our main concern, starting with these, was that just about anything that needed maintenance was 200, 300 feet in the air. And the number of cranes that are available to work on these things are fairly limited. And they don't just drive them down the road. They come in on one wind farm we were working on, the crane that was used to assemble the wind turbines came in on 23 flatbed trucks.
Wow.
And had to be assembled. So the idea of just getting a crane to a wind project to repair a wind turbine was going to cost $250,000 just to start the repair.
Wow.
And then you had the cost. So we were wondering if, like a 20-year agreement, if what we were going to see is just an episode of a wind farm turbine would just have a serious issue with it, and it just basically be left standing there, inoperable. And then the next one would fail, the next one. So at the end of 20 years, you may have started off with, 50 wind turbines, and at the end of 20 years, well, there are only going to be 25 working or something like that. But so far, what we've seen is they've been highly reliable. That yeah, I don't know of any that are non-operable. We haven't had like a battle of attrition type situation. So the wind turbines tend to be fairly reliable. We've not seen, like say, a major issue with maintenance that we were wondering about and somewhat expected at the start. So the reliability has been very good from my perspective. The solar projects, the same there, except that we just don't have the history yet with them. Like the large wind projects really started in 2000. Large solar projects have really started about 2016, 2017, something like that. So we don't really have that much of a history with them. And that said, originally when we were doing a solar project, we were talking about 5 kW, which would fit on the roof of a house.
Yeah.
We're like, we got that one. Then it was, well, we'll scale it up. We went to 50 kW, which is on the side of a commercial building. Got that one. We got to, then we went, okay. And then a year later, we're like, we'll go to 500 kW. See if we can get that to work. We got, and a few years later, a couple of years later, we went to upwards of 5 megawatts.
Wow.
And now we're talking in the 150 megawatts as if it's nothing. So we're really scaling up. The solar is really getting up there now where we'll probably get more of an idea of what the maintenance issues are going to be with it.
Could you give a comparison of like what are the maintenance events that you can expect to see over the lifetime of a traditional fossil fuel power generation plant, and like how does it compare price and dependability wise?
Wow. Well, one of the take a 1 megawatt of each. A nuclear facility, which Dairyland doesn't own or operate at the moment, would produce at an annual capacity factor of about 90%. The coal plant would be about 80%. A gas unit would be in about the 30 to 40%, depending on usage, natural gas unit. A wind project, they're now getting up where they're fairly good in the upper 30s to 40% type range, and then the solar is about 20. And so, and you can really think in terms of maintenance issues along those lines too, in that a conventional coal-fired plant, when they do an outage, it's a major event. You might have a complete turbine overhaul. You could be talking um, uh, boiler pipes being replaced, all kinds of things, updated. And so you're talking in multi-millions of dollars when you do an overhaul on a plant. And those are done. Our schedule is about a full overhaul about every 3 years, and then maintenance shutdowns twice a year. So you're talking multi-millions of dollars in maintenance costs every year for a coal-fired plant.
Wow.
Whereas with the likes of a solar project, you're out there, mowing the grass, checking, make sure that the panels are all pointing in the same direction, which may sound odd, but that's, they use predictive software to tell where the sun's going to be, to rotate the panel to be in the proper position for the sun. And sometimes that doesn't work and the panels rotate in the wrong direction. And we'll get people calling us up saying the panels are all pointing away from the sun. Why is that? But the maintenance issues on them are much lower. You'll have somebody drive around, look at them, make sure that things like a hailstorm hasn't come through, or there's dirt building up from a local farmer working the field type stuff. But the maintenance issues on them are a lot less.
Yeah, like significantly less, seems like. Yeah.
But again, the production out of them is significantly less too. So
Yeah. So what is there so people who or municipalities that still hold on to some of their grandfathered in, or I guess just any coal projects or stuff like that, what is the rationale that's reasonable? Is it just money sunken in that they just that they need to hold on?
I can give you a number of reasons. One is that the likes of yourself and your generation of engineers are being taught more entrepreneurial things to do, whereas my generation, for most part, the big questions have been solved. What we were trying to do was squeeze more costs out of a major coal plant. We were brought up in the generation where electric growth was 7 to 10%. So it was like more electricity, bigger plants. And so that's been our mindset for ever since we were young engineers. And so we hold on to a lot of that. The others, like you say, a lot of these plants are fully depreciated, paid off. They're easy assets to hold. For like some municipals, quite often what they'll have is that sitting there for most part without the idea that it won't actually operate most of the year, but that if they have a situation where they need to cover their own capacity, they can do so. So that allows them to buy off the market much cheaper than what they can generate, but they've got these old plants that are sitting there that if necessary, they can be called on to run. On like a nice hot day when the system needs generation, they can bring up these old reciprocating engines, cover their load. Otherwise, they'd have to buy capacity off the market, which could be quite expensive.
What does the on the ground logistics look like when you're trying to just like all of a sudden it's a hot day and maybe you've got like maybe a couple days warning with weather, but like how do they mobilize that many people to run a plant so quickly if it's all offline?
Well, to keep in mind, these plants get regular testing. Yeah, they have to prove that it is able to start up and run when needed. I mean, it didn't actually work in Texas when it got extremely cold, but they're called upon every once in a while to run, or they'd have to do test runs to show that they can generate at the level that they can do. So, and then they have their own people there that are capable of starting and operating these plants, and they'll get called upon to say, you need to start your generation at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it'll run for a certain period of time. So yeah, it's a responsibility to be able to operate and maintain these.
Wow. Yeah, there's just so much our entire I mean the 21st century world is just built on so much complexity. There's just so much going on out there, and the way that we've managed to keep these cities powered is incredible.
Yeah, depending on who you want to talk to, the electric system in the United States is generally considered the most complicated system ever built. The number of people that are operating it at one time, the number of utilities that are generating into the system, taking energy from the system, all the transmission lines, keeping all that running.
I learned something from our last guest, Mr. Doug Hausman, about the kind of pending problem of just capacity and generating capacity. And we talked about a little bit of a corner that we find ourselves in North America with single phase transmission and the capabilities of delivering power to the houses, like you mentioned, with that most people in the next 20 years will probably get an electric vehicle. What do you think is a likely solution that people are going that most utilities are going to approach? If you had to guess, what's the way that people are going to get out of this?
Well, one of the things I want to say is for the likes of yourself and the next generation engineers coming up, you get to tackle a lot of these questions in that it's an issue that we sit around the table at various meetings and whatever, talk about how we're going to do this. But it's one of those things that, okay, say it has to be done. When you're talking about capacity, that is a very good question in that when you talk capacity is the ability to generate energy. You have to separate that from the energy itself. You can have a 1,000 megawatt wind farm and a 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant and think, okay, well, the 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant, that capacity, its ability to generate it is nearly 100%. It's got a lot of them operate very close to 100% for the year capacity factor, well into the 90s. Whereas the wind farm, you don't know if that's going to be generating tomorrow or not. You can look at weather forecasts and whatever. You can predict, but what will actually be there at the time? And so how are you going to integrate that capacity into a transmission system, into an electric system that needs energy in various levels 24 hours a day? For example, the obvious example, solar projects, which obviously don't work very well at night. Do you generate if you generate a lot of electricity between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, how are you going to store or shift that or shift loads to meet that available generation? So how are you going to take intermittent resources like solar and wind and turn them into capacity that you know will be there when you need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is one of the big questions that likes of you will really get to answer.
Yes.
We're starting to get there, but overall in the United States, renewable energy is big in some parts of the United States, and some parts it hardly exists at all. But for the most part, it's still within what the system can handle. But as a lot of the older coal plants start to retire or get economically retired or just wear out, it's going to be how do you replace that ability to generate at 2 o'clock in the morning with something that may not be able to.
Yeah.
This whole thing,
We also had Hasala. He's in the wings, and I know he's got probably a good question here.
okay.
Thank you, Clinton. I have like a billion questions, but I'm going to ask just one, and this is going to be going on a tangent. We when we graduate and we look at our options, a lot of folks, they want to work for a big utility. They want to go for Duke, Southern Georgia, whatever, big companies like that, investor-owned utilities. That's kind of a dream of a lot of young graduates.
Yeah.
But you have been through the cooperatives. So how, what are the options when it comes to cooperative? Like, what is the differences, and how can you position yourself to be successful in being in working for a coop? What are the differences? Like, what are the secrets here?
You mean like working for a cooperative? Well, let me state one of the things about the utility business, in that when I was saying that electric usage more or less went from 7 to 10% to about 0 in 1980, hiring went from about 7 to 10% a year to basically 0 in 1980, and the utilities didn't hire a lot of engineers from about 1980 up until the year 2000. And so you've got this fairly large contingent of old engineers like myself who are about to retire out of the system. So the likes of yourself are coming along at a very good time for going to work for utilities like Duke, Southern, even the cooperatives are all looking for replacement engineers. So you're in a good position, good timing wise, as far as your graduation goes, Hasala. And then a lot of the companies are going to be looking for new engineers to replace retiring engineers. At one point, just a few years ago, over half of Dairyland's employees were within 5 years of retirement.
Wow.
So yeah, and that was not uncommon for a lot of utilities, and that the big contingent is just going to retire. And so Asala, you're in a situation where the utilities are interested in hiring people. Back in the 80s and 90s, it didn't really matter. They weren't that interested in hiring people. The other side of it is that there are a lot of new technologies that are coming at utilities, such as energy storage, renewables, electric vehicles, cybersecurity, integration issues, the transmission side of things. And so we're going to need a lot more engineers over the next few years for the new technologies that are coming at us, and to replace the older engineers that are retiring. And so from that regard, Hasala, I won't say that it'll be easy to get a job, but the jobs are going to be out there. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, you're going to, from my perspective, when you graduated, it was okay, how are you going to wring costs out? Now we've got all these new technologies that are being integrated into our systems. We need all kinds of people to work on that.
Right. And John, you mentioned not a lot of utilities hired around the 1980s and 90s. What do you think that was?
Why? It was because energy demand growth basically dried up. It went from 7 to 10% per year, like I said, which was causing utility to double in size about every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So basically zero growth, which meant that you weren't growing at all. So you didn't need new employees.
Right.
So yeah, like so I got hired on a Dairyland in 1999, and it's like, okay, you can almost, when you see the anniversary list, you can see there's a big break in, like me, there's a lot of people with experience less than me, and not too many with experiences just older than me, but then there's that up there in the 40-year range. So it's, you can tell that utilities just really didn't hire a lot of people for 20 years.
Wow. So we're in a good spot as most of the people tuning into this. I think they can really take.
I envy you if you're graduating now. One, you got good knees. My knees are shot. And two,
it's important.
Well,
As a piece of advice from you, John, is to take care of your knees. If you
yeah,
top of the list.
Climbing up old transformers and towers and whatever. Yeah. So, and my wife will tell you my hearing is shot too. So, but yeah, you've got coming into as young engineers far more opportunities than what I had, and much wider variety of opportunities, which is
That's
good.
great.
Keep it far more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on that note, things went by really fast, and I love that optimistic note for us. I'm going to be looking for a job after my next 2 years of school. So hopefully the conditions stay the same, and everyone else listening, if you wanted to contact John, John, should they maybe reach out to you on LinkedIn or what would be more
LinkedIn?
appropriate?
Yeah, just look up John McWilliams, PE, or John.McWilliams at IEEE.org.
Lovely.
Another thing in closing, that, like I said, I think the future is very bright for you, in that from 1980 to 2020, you could have left at any period in that time and come back, and things will look the same.
Right.
Same old power plants, generally the same technology, a few
Right.
new things like an iPhone or something like that. But as far as the electric world goes, you'd have come back and said, yep, I remember that substation from 30 years ago, or John was working in that job 20 years ago. He's still there. So I can, but the utility business is going to be very, very different by the year 2040 to 2050. And you're going to get to shape that. And so you get the brave new world.
Fantastic. I'm hyped.
Yeah, you should be, because the number of opportunities should be really good out there. The job description should be all over. You're not just going to be this. I was trained in my engineering background. I was trained to be a cog in a big organization. Like I was going to be put into a cubicle somewhere and allowed to work on something for day in, day out, and maybe see the light every once in a while.
Right.
Whereas I go to the universities now as part of ABET and all that, and I'm just amazed at what you guys get to work on. I barely got to know any of the other engineers in my class, let alone a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer or any other engineering professions. I go and you guys are working with them. You're collaborating with your fellow students. You're talking about designing things. I never got to do any of that.
Yeah, well, we'll try and keep up the aspirations and take up the mantle. That's great words, and really nice that you would share all the things that you had to experience and all the hard lessons you learned, and we're going to take from that. And we really appreciate your time, John. It's really nice to have guests like you come on. So
I could have talked all night on all kinds of wild things.
we'll have to have you back
Any
again.
of the good stories.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime then.
I could tell you, like my first day in Yanbu, Saudi Arabia, within 2 or 3 minutes of being on site, I had a electrician just about kill himself.
Oh no!
Running around wondering what I had done. Like, I don't know. I just got here.
Oh God!
I was told to sit on this bench for. So my introduction into working there, from guys having heart attacks to getting guys out of jail to.
Oh, wow, those are the good ones. Yeah, those are good ones. I like that. Well,
So, well, thank you very much. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you for your time
already.
honestly.
I haven't paid any attention to time. Yeah.
No, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And like I say, if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me either through my email address, john.mcwilliams@IEEE.org, or just look me up on LinkedIn. I accept invitations.
Very nice. All right.
Good.
Well, thank you, sir. Thanks. Like the team.
Thank
you
you.
guys are awesome. We'll be back. We'll be back next month for another round.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, sir. You too.
You too. Take care, guys. Good
Yeah,
night.
Bye.